Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Little Feather, and I'm on here about to read Native American Tribes, The History and Culture of the Mohegan by J. Moore and Charles River editors. First page, the introduction. It starts by saying, there were then given to Onkos, Sachem, and Monhig, 80 to Mayan Tonimo, Sachem of Narragansett, 80, and to Naningret, 20, when he should satisfy for a mayor of Edward Pomeroy's killed by his men. The Pequots were then bound by covenant that none should inhabit their native country, nor should any of them be called Pequots anymore, but Mohegs and Narragansetts forever. End quote. The Treaty of Hartford, made between the Mohegan and Narragansett after the Pequot War, from the quote Trail of Tears end quote to Wounded Knee and Little Bighorn, the narrative of American history is incomplete without the inclusion of the Native Americans that lived on a continent before European settlers arrived in the 16th and 17th centuries. Since the first contact between natives and settlers, tribes like the Sioux, Cherokee, and Navajo have both fascinated and perplexed outsiders with their history, language, and culture. And Charles Rivers' editor's Native American Tribes series, readers can get caught up to speed on the history and culture of North America's most famous Native American tribes and the time it takes to finish a commute while learning interesting facts long forgotten or never known. Among all the Native American tribes, the Mohegan people are some of the most well documented Native Americans in history. Indigenous to the northeast region of what is now the United States of America, they were among some of the earliest contacts Europeans had with the Native American tribes, and yet they have remained a constant source of mystery. When European settlers began to colonize areas like Plymouth and New Amsterdam, they quickly came into contact with various natives, including the southeast Connecticut based Mohegan, who were once part of a unified tribe with the Pequot, but now of whom are considered that group a mortal enemy. In fact, the entangled nature of the tribes meant that European colonists who could barely distinguish between the groups often found themselves in makeshift alliances and during the Pequot War in the 1630s, the Pequot were nearly wiped out. Quote, The Landing of the Pilgrims, end quote, by Henry A. Bacon. Though the Mohegan helped the colonists during that war and benefited from it, the tribe itself would begin to languish as the United States expanded. By the 20th century, the Mohegan tribe was on the verge of having its last native speaker die and suffering the extinction, of their original language. Fortunately, anthropologists and some of the Mohegans remaining helped to keep their culture and language alive, and today there is a federally recognized Mohegan tribe that lives on a reservation near their original homeland in Connecticut. Native American Tribes, The History and Culture of the Mohegans, examines the Mohegan people from their origins to their decline, as well as their revival. Along with pictures of important people, places, and events, you will learn about the Mohegans like never before, in no time at all, even. There are a few chapters here, namely four. Chapter 1, Who Were the Mohegans? Chapter 2, The Mohegan Land Controversy. Chapter 3, The Mohegans and Christianity. Chapter 4, Decline and Rebirth of the Mohegan Nation. There's also online resources and bibliography as well. Chapter 1, Who Were the Mohegans? The Mohegans are a Native American people, or were. It should probably say were. The Mohegans were a Native American people in southeastern Connecticut, and unlike many Eastern indigenous people who were forced by encroaching whites, speaking of people, a culture of people, to remove west, or who were ground down into oblivion as a result of genocide. The Mohegans have been able to hold onto their cultural identity and a portion of their original land base, although it has never been an easy path. It is on this land base, along the Thames River, where they are undergoing a major rebirth today as one of the U.S.'s richest and most powerful tribes. Some Mohegans did move west voluntarily as part of the Brothertown religious community, ending up in Wisconsin. See Chapter 3 for more information. While other Indians fought back, the Mohegans were able to keep their integrity as a tribe and a nation, and in large measure through adhering to a policy of cooperation and diplomacy, referred to as the quote Mohegan Way, end quote, dating back to their great 17th century Sachem and founding father Uncas. Next, there's an illustration here of Uncas and Mayan Tonomi. Excuse me, Mayan Tonomi. As with other Native Americans in southern New England, the Mohegans lived during the warmer months of the year in wigwams organized in villages located in river valleys where the land was fertile. They grew the quote three sisters in quote maize, beans, and squashes, and then dispersed in smaller groups into the uplands during the hunting and fishing seasons. The Mohegans' location near the ocean was rich in shellfish, and the shells of which the coastal Indians made into blue and white wampum beads, which they used for gift giving, diplomacy, fines, for crimes and infractions of social norms, and ceremonial purposes also. Um, in addition, abundant oysters, clams, and migratory fish like the salmon, shad, and alewives were eaten, smoked for winter consumption, and traded to interior parts or of land that the Native Americans um, owned for meat and hides as well. Tobacco, too, was grown for ritual purposes. Intertribal warfare was not too uncommon, but it was generally not long in duration or particularly bloody as it pertained to their behavior amongst one another. Villages were sometimes protected by fortified stockades. I'm not exactly sure what stockades are at the moment, but let's see what are stockades. Let's look up what stockades are. It says here stockades are a barrier formed from upright wooden posts or stakes, especially as a defense, excuse me, against attack or as a means of confining animals. Okay, that's what a stockade is. Moving on, in the gender division of labor, women were the primary agriculturalists and child caregivers, while men were the primary hunters and warriors. The role of the sachem or sagamore, which is what the quote big man end quote or chief among New England Indians was called, was this quote big man end quote or chief was to defend and administer justice for those who put themselves under him and to redistribute land and the goods and I guess manage the goods that were collected by him as a tribute as tribute. One moment. And then it says here a good sachem ruled by example and persuasion, since his quote subjects end quote could go um elsewhere, along with the sachem and his or sometimes her counselors, there were shamans who ministered to the sick and presided at spiritual events. Nature and the land held great spiritual value for the Indians, and many natural objects were thought to contain invisible powers called quote manitou end quote, and those powers could be accessed by humans with proper ceremonial respect. Ownership of the land was collective, with families and individuals using whatever amount they needed rather than holding on to land as a measured fixed quantity whose ownership and sellability was abstracted from its use of value. Very different conceptions of the land and how property relations were supposed to work would eventually lead to a series of conflicts between the indigenous populations and the English invaders and settlers. Originally, the Mohegans were part of the Pequots, who still live to the east of them in Connecticut, but split off to become their own distinct tribe. The term Mohegan means, quote, people of the wolf, end quote, and they may have started out as a clan with the animal as its totem. The Dutch explorer Adrian Block, who explored along the Connecticut shore of Long Island Sound, reported trading with the quote Mohicans, end quote, in 1614. The Mohegs or Mohegans first appear in the English historical records at the time of the Pequot War in 1637. It appears in information provided by Indians who were interviewed in the late 17th century that Uncas or Oncas, quote, the fox, end quote, was a disaffected Pequot who had a claim through both his father and his mother to the Pequot Sachem. Um, and I think Sachemdom is something like a kingdom, or chiefdom. Sachem is something like a chief, and so it says Sachemdom. Moving on. However, after the Dutch kidnapped and killed the old Sachem, Sassacus was chosen as his successor instead of Uncas, who quarreled repeatedly with Sassacus. Um, and period. That's a period after that. To complicate matters further, Uncas was married to Sasakis' sister and was forced into exile several times before being forgiven and allowed to come back to rejoin the tribe. The Pequots, whom were the most powerful tribe in southern New England, sold land to the New Amsterdam Dutch for a trading post on the Connecticut River. Like their neighboring rivals, the Narragansetts, the Pequots were not as decimated by white disease epidemics as many of the tribes along the coast to their north, and were regarded by the English in the Massachusetts Bay Colony as the biggest obstacle to their control and domination of the region. As described in Francis Jennings' The Invasion of America, uh, period. In 1637, the Puritans seized upon the murder of two English fur traders, and as an excuse to launch a war of extermination against the Pequots, even though Sassacus had visited Boston in an attempt to propitiate Puritan leaders in the usual Indian way with compensatory presents. Uncas saw this as his main chance to push his own interests and exact his revenge on Sassacus. To that end, he aligned himself and his small group of followers with the English. Period. Uncas told the English that the Pequots had planned to descend upon their new settlements on the Connecticut River, which they did do on the Weathersfield. Uncas traveled with Wickwash, another disaffected Pequot leader, to Hartford, where he offered to guide the English in an attack on the Pequots. Not sure if they could trust somebody, quote, who but that year came from the Pequits, end quote. Uncas was asked by Lyon Gardenier, an English professional soldier who had been sent by the proprietors of the colony to build a fort at the mouth of the Connecticut River to demonstrate his loyalty by having his men kill or capture some Pequots. Uncas's men returned from a raid with 5 Pequot heads and a Pequot captive, whom they tortured to death. Having proven themselves, Uncas led Captain John Mason's force of 90 colonial militiamen, accompanied by 70 Mohegan warriors and several hundred Narragansetts, to attack the main Pequot fort at Mystic, Connecticut on May 26, 1637. The fort was mainly occupied by women, children, and older people. While the Indian allies watched in horror, the Narragansetts had joined the expedition, on condition that the women and children be spared. The English army ruthlessly slaughtered hundreds of Pequots by setting fire to their village and putting to the sword most of those who tried to escape. In the Indians' style of warfare, taking captives rather than totally annihilating their enemies was an important objective. The males succumbed to torture as compensation for their own losses in battle, and the women and children were adopted into the tribe as useful producers and reproducers. Uncas proto-sachendum was small and in particular uh, and in particular in need of new recruits to fulfill his leadership ambitions, and he and the Narragansetts vied over who would keep the Pequot's captive taken in the war. In September 1638, the colonial authorities began their long lasting role as mediators among the Indians, meeting with the Mohegans and Narragansetts in Hartford in order to sign a major treaty. With the English acting as the arbitrators, um, 40% of the Pequot captives, 80 warriors and their families, went to the Mohegans, and 40% went to the Narragansetts, with the remaining 20% going to the Narragansetts' allied Niantics. The former Pequot territories in southeastern Connecticut, east of the Thames River, were taken over by the English through the quote right of conquest end quote. In an act of total and utter genocide, it was declared that the Pequot name was to be obliterated from history and that the captives were to be referred to henceforth as members of the tribe to which they had been assimilated. Of great importance to the future history of the Mohegans, the Treaty of Hartford also stipulated that they and the Narragansetts, who, with the elimination of the Pequots, were now the strongest tribe and the biggest threat to Puritan domination in New England. In southern New England. They were to submit differences between them to the colonial authorities and to abide by their decision rather than declaring war on one another. The treaty was signed by the Narragansett Sachem, Mayantonomi, and Uncas, and with the addition of the former Pequots and various other Indians who now came to join him, Uncas was able to become one of the most important sachems in New England, able to raise 400 or 500 warriors. The principal post-Pequot War territory of the Mohegans under Uncas was situated along the Thames River estuary and its tributaries in what later became the town of Montville, Connecticut, and there on a hill, Uncas built a fort for protection from the enemies. He also sought to exert his authority and extract tribute more broadly from Indians on the lower Connecticut River and in northeastern Connecticut. Besides using the threat of force, he extended his network through kin relations, taking women from other tribes as wives. And here's an illustration of some individuals during the alleged Pequot War. Next page. Uncas next appeared in the records in September 1640 when he signed a quote deed end quote with the government of Connecticut. In the document, Uncas agreed to prevent settlement on the lands by any power other than Connecticut, and in exchange, quote, for 5.5 yards of trucking cloth with stockings and other things, end quote, he turned over, quote, all the land that doth belong or ought of right to belong to whom is said is me, as the word reads, end quote, but not necessarily me, so excuse me. Reserving only the land the Indians had improved and were currently using for planting crops. The meaning of that agreement was ambiguous, however, and would lead to issues lasting well into the 18th century. But with the Mohegans arguing that what Uncas did in 1640 was only to give the Connecticut government the right to preempt lands before the Mohegans had sold them to private persons. Exactly how Uncas understood the terms of the agreement is unknown, although he would continue for the rest of his life to sign sometimes conflicting deeds conveying parcels of land over which he claimed ownership to individual whites for the receipt of trade goods and money or for their friendship. Most likely, Uncas had intended to acknowledge a political relationship by accepting such minimal gifts from the English in 1640, which would have put the Mohegans under the protection of the English, quote, sachems, end quote, who had demonstrated their dangerous and powerful character in the destruction of the Pequots rather than as transfer of property. A violent showdown between the Mohegans and the Narragansetts seemed inevitable. In pit of the effort to prevent it, with the 1638 Treaty of Hartford, Mayantonomi, the ambitious Narragansett Sachem, appears to have been working to form an anti English Indian coalition behind the scenes, competing with Uncas for trading and military relations with the English at the same time. The first of a series of martial conflicts between the two rival tribes took place in the year 1643. The initial cause of the hostilities occurred when, in an effort to destroy the Narragansetts' relationship with the English, Mayantonomi hired up a Quo to assassinate Uncas. After Uncas had spread tales about the Narragansetts' disloyalty, but the assassination attempt miscarried, and Uncas was only lightly wounded. Mayantonomi was summoned to Boston to explain himself to the colonial authorities as a result. Though at first Mayantonomi accused Uncas of wounding himself and making up the story, but when he promised to turn the assassin over to Uncas for punishment, instead he had him killed, thus putting the evidence to rest. Around that same time, a tribe on the Connecticut River under Sequastan, the Sachem, who was allied to the Narragansetts, killed an important member of the Mohegan tribe. He also shot arrows at Uncas as he was traveling downriver in his canoe. Uncas demanded the lives of 6 of the river Indian warriors be fortified excuse me, not fortified, but forfeited as proper compensation. And under the terms of the year 1638 treaty, he appealed to the English authorities in Hartford for assistance. The English tried to bring about a reasonable compromise, turning over the man's actual murderer, and Uncas reluctantly agreed. Sequasin, however, refused to turn the man over, and Uncas and his Mohegans attacked the river Indians, killing and wounding some of them and burning their wigwams. This led to open warfare between the Narragansetts and the Mohegans, giving Mayantonomi no choice but to respond to such major affront to his ally or lose face with the Indians the Narragansetts were trying to draw into their clientage and tributary network. Mayantonomi complained about Uncas's actions to the Connecticut governor, seeking permission to take retaliatory measures per the year 1638 treaty. Consequently, he led a large expeditionary force of 900 to 1,000 Narragansett warriors from what is now southwestern Rhode Island to attack the Mohegans in their own country. Even though the Mohegans were greatly outnumbered, they nevertheless emerged victorious. Once, though, the two sides had lined up facing each other on the flat land, Uncas, a strong, well built man, came forward to offer single combat with the Narragansett Sachem, and when his offer was refused, Uncas followed through with his plan. That fell flat onto the ground. That fell flat. I think it says that he fell flat on the ground, and his warriors let loose a shower of arrows aimed at their enemy. The surprised Narragansetts took immediate flight, with the whooping Mohegans in hot pursuit. 30 Narragansetts were killed before they could make it back to their country beyond the Pawcatuck River, and the Narragansett Sachem Mayantonomi was weighed down by a heavy vest of mail armor loaned to him by an English friend, and was unable to quickly flee the scene and was taken prisoner by the Mohegans. Mayantonomi tried to convince his captors to join his anti-English alliance, but Uncas refused and conveyed him to Hartford to let the English decide his fate. After much frenzied consultation among both the political and religious leadership in Hartford and Boston, the colonial authorities decided that Mayantonomi ought to be put to death. Since it was evident that Uncas would never be safe with him still alive, to keep their own hands clean, they returned Mayantonomi back to Uncas's custody to be executed, quote, in his own jurisdiction, not in the English plantations, end quote. Although it was specified that it was to be done without cruelly torturing him in the customary manner of the Indians, Uncas's brother took care of the task on their return trip, striking Mayantonomi on the head with his hatchet from behind. The English had sent 2 of their men along as witnesses for the execution and dispatched some musketeers to stay with Uncas in case the Narragansetts sought revenge of his death. and I'm gonna end with this last statement and come back and read some more later. Some say Uncas celebrated his victory by eating a slice of flesh from his enemy's shoulder. Okay. So again, my name is Little Feather, and I'm here reading Native American Tribes: The History and Culture of the Mohegan by Jay Moore and Charles Rivers, editors. I appreciate you guys for coming and checking me out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Um, may you guys have a blessed evening, and check back with me when I come back. You can reach me on Facebook, on social media, on Facebook at facebook.com/. Let me see. What is my my source, my link, my profile link. Okay, so it's www.facebook.com/the intrigue king, and you can reach me on Twitter also at um www.twitter.com/I am Eric C. White, EricCwhite. Also, I have a blog page or a blog account called Beyond Social Online, and you can reach me online on Twitter at twitter.com/on Beyond Social, and you can reach me on Facebook at facebook.com/on Beyond Social. Um, and I guess I'll end that here. So thanks again. Peace out.